Hello all, I'm really happy to introduce LYDIE MEHEUS for another exciting webinar at the I3h Institute. LYDIE MEHEUS is the Managing Director of the Anticancer Fund, ACF, a Belgian research foundation of public utility with an international scope dedicated to the development of cancer treatments regardless of their commercial value. LYDIE co-founded the Anticancer Fund in 2013 with entrepreneur and funder Luc Verhelst, after leading an alike Swiss organization, Reliable Cancer Therapies. LYDIE is still Executive Director of Reliable Cancer Therapies, today the collaborating partner of ACF for projects outside Europe. LYDIE is a breast cancer patient diagnosed in 2018 and successfully treated since then. As a breast cancer patient, LYDIE is a member of the BIG Patient Advisory Group of Martin Picard, our ULB colleague and scientific director at De-escalation Institute. In 2019, LYDIE was appointed by the European Commission to represent patients for 3 years in the Committee for Advanced Therapies at the European Medicines Agency. She obtained a PhD in science at the University of Ghent and worked at Innogenetics and as a VP R&D at Genimmune, both Belgian biopharmaceutical companies. She has published many international peer-reviewed manuscripts, lately on drug repurposing in cancer therapies. And just last week, the ACF announced that the drug repurposing brought us a second effective drug therapy to treat focused severe COVID-19 group. LYDIE and I came into contact almost 5 years ago when the ACF decided to hire Siska Verbaernert as PhD student to work on drug repurposing, a project that they successfully delivered just a couple of months ago. Siska is now active in a secondment at EMA, something we're really proud of. Public money for clinical research in oncology is a necessity, and LYDIE will present to us why. The recording of this presentation, as well as the slides, will be at your disposal after the seminar. Please don't hesitate to let us know via the Q&A section, accessible at the bottom or the right section of your screen, whether you like to get a word to pose your question to LYDIE after her presentation. And in case you don't feel comfortable asking the question in person, I will transfer the questions. I'm sure LYDIE will be happy to answer in our debate and afterwards. LYDIE, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hilde, for the nice introduction, and thanks I3h for inviting me and giving the opportunity to explain our view on why we think that public money for clinical research in oncology is a necessity. So yeah, I hope at the end I can convince you, and if not, that you will have questions and arguments, and I will be happy to discuss it with you. So what is the current situation? I think all cancer treatments today are developed and brought to the market by the private system, but we have to accept, it's not a blame, that the private system first focus on financial return on investment, or rather return on equity, as I learned from economists. And of course, they have to serve their stakeholders, and their stakeholders are the investors. That's why we think we need a complementary system, because if we want to develop pathways for that are more focused on societal return. What do we understand under societal return? Societal return is return for the patients on the one hand, and also for governments on the other hand, I think. So in oncology, the return for patients is quite obvious. It's overall survival and quality of life. And that's what we together call the added therapeutic value. And there are quite some clear definitions on what the expectations are. For overall survival, the WHO has suggested that for treatment, you should have at least a gain of 4 to 6 months. And then for quality of life, there's a lot of debate ongoing. What are the right measurements for quality of life? And that's there are tools available, but they are open for improvement. We also have to think about the unmet needs, because 20% of all cancer indications are rare cancers and they are underserved today. That's quite obvious. And of course, all those cancer treatments only serve patients if they are accessible for patients. And that means that in Europe, in our European system, that they are affordable for the different member states and that they can be reimbursed. So if we look at the current system, does it really bring patient value as I just defined it? Well, there have been some interesting data analysis papers published on this topic. For example, this one, where they've seen that if they look at all the treatments that were approved by EMA after 5-year follow-up, roughly only half of them really meet the standards that they show an improvement in survival and or quality of life. If we look at the magnitude of clinical benefit, being the overall survival, we see that we have a median value of 2.6 months, which is not really very impressive and doesn't meet the WHO standard, by the way. So yes, there is a lot of innovation and new cancer treatments for the past 10-15 years. But if we really look at it in detail, what do we see there? We see a lot of Me Too products. And again, we see that the real gain in added therapeutic value is rather limited. And I find this a very interesting study from, by the way, Andrew Law, who is a health economist. And we have to think of how comes that we have all those Me Too products, and those Me Too products also have the disadvantage that they are more and more expensive. What do we see? The analysis I just shown was until 2014 for new cancer therapies, and those were most targeted therapies, they are called, directed towards genetic mutations in the genome. While more recently, there is much enthusiasm about immunotherapy. But also in immunotherapy, we see the same phenomenon, namely that there are a lot of Me Too products once again. For example, if we look at what is called the checkpoint inhibitors, then the 5 big companies, big pharma companies, all have a similar product, an anti-PD-1 or anti-PD-L1 inhibitor. And there are numerous clinical trials running with those products. Here you see in 2017, we were at more than 400 trials. Today, we are at around 800 trials running with checkpoint inhibitors and also combinations of checkpoint inhibitors. That's, of course, it's a good thing, but maybe it's a little too much of the same. And what is the trend today in immuno-oncology? Here you have a very recent update of the last 2 years, where we see the most new components coming. And if you look at the different types of immunotherapy, then you see that the focus now really seems to be even on cell therapy, where you see a tremendous growth from 405 agents to more than 1,000 agents in 2019 in different phases of development. And yes, again, along the same line, this is a slide I got from Carl June, who is the godfather of CAR T cells. I think maybe most people in the audience have heard of CAR T cells. This is it's a personalized cell therapy where you take immune cells from your patients, you bring them to the lab, you manipulate them, and you give them back to the same patient. So it's autologous cell therapy. And it's actually also gene therapy. And as you can see here, there are plenty of startup companies now focusing on this type of approach. But this is a slide from last year, and it's already outdated, because if you look in the inner circle, where you have the marketed products, in Belgium, we have 2 products on the market, Yescarta and Kymriah, both for the same target. Again, the problem of Me Too products. And a 3rd product has been approved, Tecartus. It's not yet reimbursed, but it was approved last month. But then in the circle of the filed products, meaning on the desk of EMA, I'm not telling secrets there, but there are multiple CAR T cells who will be approved next year, most likely for targets like in multiple myeloma, BCMA, and even additional products for CD19. So, and it's interesting to note that all these products are actually orphan drugs. Seems contradictory, but yes, it's possible. We have same targets, orphan drugs, and small indications. How comes? Well, I know there are economists in the room, and I think we have to look for an explanation more in economical drivers for all those Me Too products. It seems to be a very successful business. What happens is that you have spin-offs from academic groups, and I give here some examples where you can see that you have the spin-offs, you have the success of the spin-offs, and then the price that is paid by the big companies to have those products in their portfolio and then finally bring them to the market. Of course, there's nothing wrong in principle with this concept, but the reality today is that this whole approach results in quite expensive, new, innovative products for a selective group of orphan indications. So the whole paradigm today is that we need to make oncological research more patient-centered. But if we are honest, and if we listen to really, I would say, the experts in the field, somebody like Denis Lacombe, who clearly also states that our research today in the current system is really focused on drugs and not on patients. And I found a very interesting article from actually the vice president of ASCO, who made a comparison between the fairy tale of the emperor's new clothes and the value of the new cancer treatments. And I really would advise you to read this, that indeed there is a lot of new cancer drugs approved, but that the real benefit for patients is still questionable. So how does that link with the idea that we should have more public clinical research? Let me first explain where we think that public clinical research is possible, Because I'm not saying pharma is doing a real good thing. They have all the new compounds and that's their business. That's what they are good at. But is there also room for really development work that is outside the scope of pharma? And we think the answer is yes. And we see two domains where development of new treatments could be feasible and where it's not within the scope of the pharma industry. First, there is the generic drug repurposing and maybe also the autologous cell therapy. But let me explain somewhat further. And yes, this idea, we're not the only ones with these ideas. This is quite an interesting report that dates from 2016 and was commissioned by the Minister of Health at the time in the Netherlands, who also asked, where could there be new treatments for cancer better, faster, and cheaper? And they also came to the conclusion that for non-commercial drug development, there is room in the area of drug repurposing and rediscovery, and in the area and in the domain of cell and gene therapy. It's important, I think, to explain what we understand under drug repurposing, because drug repurposing is used a lot as a terminology. And I found this very interesting division in 4 scenarios by Chris Austin from INCATS in the US, where they say you have the commercial scenarios and a non-commercial scenario. Let me explain. If you have therapeutic assets that still have a patent life, but that never made it to the market, that have been shelved, and then you find a new indication that can be a really commercial success, and that's actually what happened with the development of Viagra. It was originally developed for angina pectoralis. It had some nasty side effects, but then it turned out some clever people thought, oh, maybe we can develop it for that, so to say, side effect, and that's what happened. Then you also have therapeutics which are on the market for a certain indication that are still on patent, but then if there is an interesting new indication that all of a sudden pops up with a large market, then it could be worth developing that product for that market. And that's what's happening nowadays with COVID, with some drugs that are still on patent, like tocilizumab and anakinra, and also remdesivir. Those are clear examples. What also can happen is that drugs that have been on the market, but that were not, that have been withdrawn of not fully approved, like thalidomide, which was on the market but withdrawn and was then redeveloped for multiple myeloma. Again, there, a success story. But besides all those commercial success stories, there are also therapeutics where there's no patent life left. There's a lot of generic drugs. And then third parties, mostly non-commercial investigators, academics, find a new indication. And that's also what happened in COVID with dexamethasone. And then you have clinical data, you have results, but the system, there's no way today that this can get approved and can become on label. I will try to explain a little further. Yes, first, if you look at the whole domain of repurposing of generic drugs, we have tried to map all those generic drugs for the oncology field. And here you can see the numbers in oncology, where we looked where the data are and what type of data are available for those drugs in the oncology field. And here you have all the numbers and also the reference where you can find all the information. And we thought it would be interesting to do the same exercise with the COVID repurposing. And that's what we did. We also established a database for all the generic, where we have listed all the generic repurposed drugs in for COVID-19. And you all have heard of hydroxychloroquine and a lot of other products. Dexamethasone was also there, and a lot of clinical trials ongoing. The problem was that mostly those were small clinical trials and no decent conclusions could be drawn. There was a lot of contradiction about the results of the clinical trials. Yeah, sorry, I will come back to that. This is just to illustrate that in the oncology field, the Anticancer Fund is supporting this type of clinical trials, and all that information can be found on our website. So if you look at what is the best clinical trial of infrastructure to evaluate the drugs, and here I want to give the example of what is called a platform trial, where you compare the standard of care with different treatment arms, and where each arm can have a drug, a combination of drugs, a commercial drug, or a generic drug. So this is something that has been set up in the UK with public money, through the MRC, and where they really compared all the different interventions for advanced prostate cancer. And so you will see that, for example, there is abiraterone there, which is a commercial drug product, but there is also old drugs like non-cancer drugs like celecoxib, zoledronic acid. Those are combinations of non-cancer drugs. There is docetaxel, which is an old chemotherapy. So you can pull everything together in one single setup for a clinical trial, and so make it also comparable, the results of the different treatments. And that's a very important concept, I think, if we want to come to really determine added therapeutic value for patients. What we see that in the US, people are pushing, not people, but the regulator really is pushing hard for more what they call master protocols. That means this type of large clinical trial where you evaluate different intervention, different drugs in parallel. So far for the drug repurposing, and as I said, development of autologous cell therapies is also something that could theoretically be done independent from pharma industry and really focusing on the patient needs. But autologous cell products have a very complex regulatory framework, rightly, I would say. So we can divide autologous cell products in what is called ATMPs and non-ATMPs. ATMPs, most of those cell products are ATMPs. That means they are substantially manipulated or they are used in a non-homologous way. And ATMPs are advanced therapy medicinal products, and they are regulated in that special subcommittee within EMA called the CAT. So today, a lot of research is ongoing in academic centers with ATMPs, not only the CAR T cells that I've mentioned, but also dendritic cell therapy, TILs, so T cells that are used in different ways to take them from the patients, manipulate them, give them back to the patients. And that type of research is mostly supported by foundations, as you can see here in the right side of the slide. The Belgian foundations, Kom op tegen kanker, Fondation contre le cancer, and our organization, we are collaborating in a kind of brainstorming roundtable with the investigators in Belgium who are today investigating cell therapies to try to understand what the hurdles are if they are today running clinical trials with autologous cell therapy. Why can they not bring it further? And with further, I mean all the way to the patient. So here you see a listing of the arguments, where are the hurdles, the roadblocks for them. As I said, the regulatory process is very complex. It tends to be also a very costly process. Even for academics, the per patient cost for this type of intervention is high. So if you have to set up clinical trials, it comes at a rather high cost. So it's a complex area where today I think we don't really have a solution of how to connect this academic research with the end user, being the patient. And I will come back to this problem later. But it's kind of interesting. And again, here I want to flag this, and I'm reaching out to the economists in the audience, because you see now in the different European countries that the politicians are realizing that those very expensive autologous cell therapies that are becoming available, that they question why can that not be produced by the universities. And here, this is a very recent document that was flagged to me by a French organization, that apparently in the French parliament, there was even an amendment that was voted, where they pointed out that indeed CAR T cells can be produced in university centers at a reasonable price, while actually in the system there are just very high priced commercial products. But I think politicians don't really fully realize the complexity of the systems, and we really need a development pathway. And today I don't have the answers on how to combine those two challenges, the expensive commercial products on the one hand, the academics that theoretically have the capacity to produce it, but how this can be brought forward. And I really would love to discuss this with you in more detail. So yes, that was my first part, or where can we do developmental work, really looking for new treatments that fulfill unmet needs, develop them with public money. But if you think then on the other part, access to treatments, where should the public money be used for the, let's say, that part of the development pathway for the access? There are even more need, I think, for public money for access. What I mean by that is that we should have public money for registration trials and for comparative effectiveness, for de-escalation trials, for therapy optimization trials, for cancer registries, and yes or no for autologous cell therapy. A little more explanation there also. I tried to explain earlier, I think if we want to identify the best treatment for the patient, that we need to compare the different therapies that become available, both commercial and non-commercial. And as I already said, the best format for comparing different treatment is that platform trial, those multi-arm designs. But today they are not really used and implemented. And we need public money to set up this type of infrastructure. And then if the infrastructure is out there, then companies can pay for their own arm in the trials, and maybe foundation or nonprofits could pay for what I would call the non-commercial arm in the same infrastructure. And as I said, that is exactly what has happened in the COVID situation. So it's not a very theoretical model. It has proven to be feasible. So the need for more comparative evidence on the new drugs and devices, I think has been worked out also in some recent publications from earlier this year in the Lancet. You have the reference here. There are two publications that are connected. And together with the authors of these publications, we came up with some ideas about really what is needed in the regulatory system to be reformed, so that this approach of more comparative effectiveness would yield to, let's say, tools for better selection of those treatments that really benefit the patient. And you have the references here if you are interested in looking into more detail into this. So besides public money for registration trials, I also mentioned public money that is needed for what is called therapy optimization. And what do we understand under therapy optimization? This is a project which is heavily supported and flagged also by the EORTC. When a product is brought to the market, a new drug, then it's brought with the protocol that has been optimized by the pharma player who is bringing the product on the market. And obviously, they look in their system to maximize, besides the benefit for the patient, but also the return, the financial return. That means, for example, with the checkpoint inhibitors, for a year of treatment certainly works, but we can question, is 6 months of treatment not as good? And that's exactly an example of a therapy optimization type of trial. Does that have to happen post-market or during the registration phase? That is of course open for debate, but in the current system, what EORTC is proposing is that all that type of optimization for period of the duration of the treatment, also the dosing of the treatment, etc., that could be done immediately after the product comes to the market. But again, it it's obvious that this type of optimization will need support by public money. Very important is here that the focus of this type of research is again on the added therapeutic value, on the patient survival and the quality of life. I also mentioned where there's a lot of interest for, if you want to put the patient in the center, is in de-escalation, especially in breast cancer. There's a lot of ideas and possibility of giving patients less treatment with the same effect, of course, on overall survival and improvement in most cases of quality of life. And this is something which is high on the agenda of the big group. And I think I don't have to explain why all this type of clinical research is outside the scope of the industry. Yes, and maybe I can make this here a little more personal. If you think of breast cancer treatments, and in my personal case, I was supposed to be treated with an adjuvant treatment with a combination of 2 chemotherapies and paclitaxel, and then also the Herceptin. But when we looked at the data and the evidence out there, it is clear that for my diagnosis, which was lymph node negative T1, that actually you could drop part of the chemotherapy. Doesn't sound really important, but as a patient and for quality of life, it makes a huge difference if you don't get the anthracyclines. You're not losing your hair, you're less sick. I could continue working during my treatment, but there has never been a randomized clinical trial for this type of treatment for obvious reasons. So there are data out there, and there's now even 7-year data out there. And for me, that was more than convincing that I should have this therapy. And also the oncologists in the big university centers, they are aware of the results. And if you look at the latest update of the American guidelines, it's even mentioning that, okay, this is a possibility. So yes, if you're lucky to be well informed as a cancer patient, you can drop the anthracyclines. But again, I think this type of approaches, and not only for chemotherapy, but also for less radiotherapy, all kind of ideas are out there, but they need decent clinical research. And of course, it will not come from the commercial players. Now, let's come back to the idea of the autologous cell therapy. What has to happen there? I think we have to look critically at what is really the value that it brings to patients. And if we are convinced that we have cell therapies at hand that bring added therapeutic value to patients, is there a way to bring those therapies to the patients if they are outside of the scope of the commercial players? And as you see here, we have a question mark. We have to think about pathways, but today I think it's a really difficult playground. So what should change if we want to get things moving in what we would call the right direction, being the direction toward more patient centricity? I think, first of all, public funding has to be defined as not only the governmental money, that's a classical definition, I think, of public funding, money from the taxpayers, but actually philanthropic money is also public money. can either be from private philanthropy or from public philanthropy, but it's all money coming from the public. Crowdfunding could be a source of public funding. That's happening more and more nowadays. And even money from company or health insurers, companies then for their social responsibility, they could provide drugs or even some money to support this type of development of treatments that is not on their dashboard. For me, it would be better if we could define public money as money that serves the public. But okay, it's just a wild idea, and I'm happy to take all your comments on that. I really think that we can agree with the industry on the idea that there are really possibilities out there that are not within their scope. And here you have a statement from an industry player who really says that it's up to us, the foundations, advocacy groups, and the government to take that challenge and to go into that direction. We should stop thinking that the pharma industry will solve all the healthcare issues. And yes, of course, this will require much more collaboration than we have today. Collaboration between government and philanthropy. And maybe it sounds a little naive, but again, as I already explained, if we look at the examples of COVID, the real big successful trials like the recovery trial in the UK was a platform trial supported with governmental money from the Wellcome Trust, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, from Oxford University. So you see, if it's not pure theoretically, it can be possible in my view, or maybe I'm just too naive, but okay. And are there parties interested in this type of collaborations? I think yes. I think in Belgium, the KCE is doing a real good job. They have those calls for pragmatic trials, which really goes in this direction. Also, the European Cancer Organization has it now on their radar. Institutes like Mario Negri are very interested in this independent clinical research. This is a slide from Silvio Garattini from 2 years ago, where he also was really promoting more independent clinical research because it really focuses on the patient. What type of regulatory changes do we need if we want to have a success story in this non-commercial drug repurposing? Yes, I think on the regulatory side, changes are required because the situation as it is today is that EMA exclusively evaluates clinical trial data that are brought to them by the market authorization holders or the producers of the drugs. So, you know, most people are familiar with the pathway where you have your clinical research and the data evaluated by EMA. You get the European market authorization. Yeah, by the way, for oncology, everything has to be approved at the European level. And then you go to the different countries because the reimbursement is a decision which is taken at the member state level. And then it's decided yes or no, country by country, who will reimburse. And finally, of course, it's very important that you get clinical adoption, that the treatment will become part of the guidelines. But in contrast to the US system, the European system, really there, the accessibility of the treatments is dependent on the reimbursement. Of course, there's a shortcut. You can have off-label use, especially when the generic drugs are on the market for another indication, then you can have off-label use, but the major disadvantage of the off-label use is that it rarely or get reimbursed in the different countries. And there are other disadvantages, such as the liability of the prescriber and the chance that the products are taken off the market if the primary indication is not of interest anymore. So for that reason, we have been trying to find solutions, and we have been working together with the STAMP group. That's the expert group within the European Commission for safe and timely access to medicinal products, to find a solution or a framework so that not-for-profit organizations can get access to EMA for data if they come with data on drug repurposing. What has been, after 2 years of discussion with the STAMP group, there was a proposal that indeed EMA would look at data from third parties and then would provide scientific advice to those third parties to see what would be the right needs for the agency to have the right data to come to market authorization. But in this case, it's called bringing drugs from off-label to on-label. And there, the hurdles are different from than if you compare it to bringing a drug from really scratch to a market authorization. But unfortunately, the whole project is now put on hold due to COVID. And I think it's really a shame, because at the same time, COVID and the drug repurposing in COVID is in itself really a pilot project. But okay, it's what it is. The good news, however, is that, I don't know if people have been following this, but last week or 2 weeks ago, the European Commission announced their new pharmaceutical strategy for the period 2020-2025. And in that new pharmaceutical strategy, we see that they have repurposing of patent drugs taken up. And also the pilot project is part of that of the pharmaceutical strategy. So we have good hopes that it will be brought forward. So I come to my conclusion now that indeed what we are thinking should happen to benefit the patient as good as we can is that the pharma industry continues with what they are doing, bringing new drugs to the market with their focus on where it is, but that we need a parallel system that is supported by public money and that is driven by academia, by foundations, by collaborative groups, and that in this parallel pathway, we really bring those treatment options to the patients that are outside the scope of the pharma industry. And I think now it's the right time for Europe. We had a lot of focus on cancer, both in the Commission Research and Innovation and in the Commission Santé. And there is, especially with the cancer mission, I think, there's a lot of expectations that things will change, that the government has to be more entrepreneurial and really take ownership for really supporting the development of treatments that benefit the patient. But yeah, we are struggling, of course, now with COVID, and we hope that the cancer the whole cancer topic will still remain high on the agenda. Okay, and this is the end of my presentation. I end with this idea of Vika Sukatme from Emory University, with whom we are collaborating closely, and that we all think that cancer is still a major issue, even in COVID times. Just to give you some framing, in Belgium, we will have 15,000 people who have died of cancer in 2020, most likely, but we have yearly 30,000 people dying of cancer in Belgium. So I really think we should keep cancer high on the agenda. And that's where I end here. Thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Lydie, for this very interesting presentation. You rightly indicated in the beginning of your presentation that there are different types of fragments of repurposed drugs depending on the patent status. Can you just quickly explain in terms of liability for repurposing, who will be liable for these clinical trials?
Yes. So if you say you're repurposing a drug, that was what we agreed upon in the whole STAM discussion. So for the clinical trials, it will be investigator-driven clinical trials, supported so with public money, but following the scientific advice from the regulator. But then the label extension still is expected to be done by the market authorization holder. So the hopes from the Commission and also from us is that if the companies don't have to invest in the expensive part in the clinical trials, and if they really can use the data that are coming from the foundations or from the investigators, whatever, and if they can rely on the fact that those clinical trials have been performed in line with what the regulator requires, then we hope that they can be convinced to really go for the label extension. For them, that would be, it's very technical, a type 2 variation, so they just have to adapt the SMPC and they have to adapt their inserts. And that's it. It's still a cost, but it's quite a limited cost compared to going through the whole development pathway.
Thank you. And yeah,
liability, then for the pharmacovigilance, that remains on the companies. But anyhow, maybe important to know is that even if we don't go to bringing the drugs on label and keep it off label, it's always the market authorization holder who remains also responsible for the pharmacovigilance for off-label use. So for them, the pharmacovigilance doesn't make a huge difference.
Indeed. I saw that in one of your last slides, you also gave the picture of the book of Mariana Mazzucato, who is a top economist, and another top economist, Matthias Watripon, our co-director of the I3h Institute, also has a question. Matthias?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for a very interesting presentation. It was really quite intriguing. My question is about, well, you stressed, okay, private, pharma companies, they look for return on equity, and that's life. This is how the world works, and we should take that as a given. And then there will be holes there, and the public sector has to kind of complement, in a sense. And of course they do, funding research, but then there are other things that they can do. And I do think that indeed these are all interesting avenues. Now, at the same time, in that was a bit paradoxical. You mentioned both Mariana Mazzucato and this paper by Andy Lowe, and they are both, in a sense, saying, look, you know, these pharma companies, they have it too good, because, well, Mariana Mazzucato says, I think, you know, 75% of the new molecules are kind of funded by the NIH and other places like that. But in a sense, they are not getting that big a return, and you have too big a return later on. And Andy Lowe's paper is saying, look, we see that there are so many Me Too's because it's so profitable to have these Me Too's. Huh?
Yeah.
And so it's not just that they are making a lot of money, but on top of that, maybe the resources are not directed to the best uses. Maybe not enough is spent on real innovation. Now, it's always, you know, if I'm a cancer patient, I understand the 2 more months in my life, that's good. And even though it's called a Me Too. But the question is, it is a question of a balance. And I understand that what they do is they compare so-called fast-track drugs with non-fast-track drugs. And Me Too's are non-fast track. And that somehow you make a lot of money on the non-fast track. And so at some level, you know, patient-centric, to me, it's obvious that everybody should think about patients. And I bet that pharma companies are saying, we are looking for patients too, after patients too, and they do. But there is still a question, if there is really, of course, we are in a free market system, and I think everybody deserves a return, and otherwise they won't do it, and that's a problem. But the question next to what you've presented, which is, I think, very interesting, one consequence, one lesson I took from this paper by Andy Lowe was, okay, maybe we can change to some extent the authorization process to kind of foster more radical innovation by reducing the profitability of Me Too's. Now, to me, that would be win-win, but I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I fully agree with that one. So I didn't want to comment too much on how we should frame the pharma industry. I really think we should put the bar higher for the pharma industry, as you rightly say. And how can we do that? That's what I touched upon with comparative effectiveness. I think now there's all that new innovation coming quite, let's say, within the same time slot. So you're not comparing the new innovative drugs, the one to the other. And I think you really need to compare more and to put the bar higher, because if you have comparative data, then the HTAs who have to reimburse will be more selective and will select only one. And what will happen if it's not reimbursed? It's not of interest to the companies. So it will drive them to be better or to not go there, because they will be afraid of comparison. We've seen that happening, for example, with expensive cell therapies like Provenge. That was the first cell therapy that came to the market in Europe, but then it was withdrawn after 2 years on the market because it was not reimbursed. So there, I think if we could try to force more comparative effectiveness and put the bar higher for the companies, they will make the right reflections that they really have to be better, or that they will not make it in the end. That's my hope, but that's indeed where we need to frame it. Because now they just do their own trial and then it goes to the market. There's never talking about comparing. And that's my big frustration also today when I'm in the CAT. You see all those products coming for this very small market with the same targets. And then the regulators say, yeah, it's not within our remits. We have to live with the single arm trials and we cannot ask the companies to compare. Of course not. It's not within their limits. So it's really up to the Commission and to the decision makers to make some changes to the system and put the bar higher. That's
Thank you.
my view. Maybe it's a little naive, but I fully agree that on the side of the pharma developments, we need framing. And yeah.
Well, if you are naive, I'm with you, so I'm naive too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lydie. The next question comes from our other co-director, Michelle Goldman. Michelle?
Hey, Lydie, good to see you. Sorry, I had to join late, but I was still able to capture, I hope, your important messages. First, regarding the discussion that you just had with Matthias, I have a first question, which is, don't you think that all this question about big pharmas and, you know, the way we should interact with them are in fact hampered by the fact that pharma by definition are global. So it's clear that it's not us in Belgium and perhaps even not Europe alone that can really implement significant changes. And but that was more of a comment, but you can perhaps elaborate more. Now my question is, and perhaps again I may miss some of your remarks, but I was struck by the fact that you mentioned public funding for registration trials. And I would like you to elaborate on this because registration trials are, you know, these are the critical steps for companies to get reimbursement. And do you think that it's really the role of the public to support this financially, or would you say that this makes sense only for certain types of drugs, which would be my own position, and we can elaborate on it, please?
Yes, maybe I didn't explain it good enough, but what I mean, when I mean for registration trials, I mean for setting up the infrastructure for the trials, like the Stampede trial. That was the example I give. I don't know, maybe you missed that. It's in the UK for prostate cancer, where the infrastructure is provided by MRC, and where the company will pay for its own arm in the trial for registration. But then you have automatically the comparison. It's maybe you are familiar with the I3h trial in the US, or the GBM Agile. That's that whole concept where you need the public money for the infrastructure, and also where the people who run the system, being with public money, that they decide on the design of the trial also. Yes?
Can I just comment on it? Because that's a very important comment. And I fully agree with what you said. And perhaps especially for Matthias de Watripon, this is exactly what we try to do now in Wallonia. We are working very hard to get an inter-university clinical research platform to be able to conduct such trials. And indeed, what we are asking to the government is indeed the money to have the infrastructure, being clear that the trials themselves will have to be paid by the industry. So I fully agree with what you said. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, Michelle. Then the next one who asked the question is Sophia. Sophia?
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Can you hear me well? My phones, can you hear me better now?
Better. Yes, better.
Okay. So thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, and also for sharing your personal history, a story about you know, all this struggling with this cancer therapies and drugs, which is very, very relevant. So you mentioned also some options or initiatives that could be helpful to foster innovation in the development of this drugs for cancer. So one of the things you mentioned was this master protocols that, in particular in the US, the regulators is kind of pushing forward for that. I was wondering if you could please provide some, some idea on how easy it is to implement this type of master protocols. So in practice, are they easy for to be implemented? Could it really be a good way to push forward the development of these drugs? And you also mentioned cancer registries, which I'm not very familiar in exactly how they operate, but it seems those type of initiatives to be actually easy, or at least easier to implement. So I was wondering if you could please comment a bit about these two types of initiatives.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, is it easy to start that type of platform trials? Honestly, we don't have experience with it. Yes, we have been interacting with the organizations like Stampede and also GBM Agile in the US. There are others in Australia to see if we could apply for putting one arm in the trial as a not-for-profit organization. But it still remains a costly thing, even for one arm in those large trials. And no, it's not really easy because as you need the whole committee who is responsible for the infrastructure to agree on your design, etc., etc. So it's a more complex story, but I really believe that in the end, it's worthwhile. So yes, it's feasible and it's more complex. It's still expensive. But yes, I think the value of the results that come out of that type of approach is really worth it. And I think you should talk to the people who have hands-on experience with it. And I think the recovery trial in the UK for COVID is a good example. There has been other trials for COVID. Let me think, the one that was where Herman Hoostens in Belgium was involved, the European one, CAPS. There's also the Solidarity trial from the WHO. I mean, we can think of examples of that type of trials that really delivered valuable results. But it doesn't make life more easy, but it's also, I think we have to get used to that type of approach. It's a new approach. It really requires very clever statisticians, that I'm convinced of. But okay, I think it's doable. And then to come back to your question on the registries, yes, I didn't expand on that, but what we see now, especially with CAR T cells and cell therapies, which go into independent registries, the EBMT, that's on a voluntary base, those EBMT registries and some of the cancer registries. And then data, yeah, it's difficult to enforce it. Data collection is not properly done. So, and if we want real life data, then I think we really should invest in having good registries. Because if we want to learn how therapies are performing in real life, that those registries in oncology are really of prime importance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Mikael.
Thank you very much first for your presentation, which is very puzzling on many aspects. So I'm an economist. Yeah. I hear two gigantic market failures, and at the same time, I'm thinking I see a way to fix that. So since it's not fixed, it means that there is something I did not understand, and I'd like to understand better why it's not so. So I'm taking away two messages from the first half of your presentation. The first one was there are too many Me Too's. I have partly studied that, so it's indeed very profitable to start a Me Too. A very bad thing for the public authority to authorize a Me Too is that you have something which is patented, and whenever you have a patent, it will be heavily advertised. That destroys the market for the generics. So it has a very perverse effect to authorize these drugs. But then the solution seems pretty obvious. It's just don't authorize them. Or at least if there are some kind of Me Too that you don't expect the benefit will be more than 4 months, 6 months extra life, why don't you give it an authorization, market authorization for 2 years, knowing that you will have a gigantic experimentation, and therefore after 2 years it will be withdrawn automatically if you don't prove yourself. So that would destroy the incentive to submit Me Too's, right? In my humble opinion, at least. That's again pretty naive. The second thing is you said at some point some repurposing will just not happen. Okay, so I have these out of patent molecules. Nobody will want to invest in, if I understand correctly the problem, nobody will want to invest in showing that this old drug can be used for a new purpose because you can't make money out of it. But then the solution also seems easy. Let's just have some copyrights that if you discover that this old drug can be used for something else, then every time it's used, you will have to pay some fee, some copyright fee to the discoverer, not inventor, but the one who understands the new usage. And that would create a market, and therefore the incentive, even for generic producers, to say, "Oh, I found this new use for this generic that I'm, by the way, producing, and everybody, or even my competitors, will have to pay me some fee if you want to sell it." So, again, I'm not saying these are solutions, but at least these are puzzles that I would like to understand why we don't use this kind of sticks and carrots.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe for your second question is the stick and carrots is what we want to avoid actually is that those generic products, when there is a new indication, that it should stay at the same price. Of course, if you rebrand it, and that's something that has happened also, if you just make a new product out of it and you rebrand it, then you can ask a much higher price. That's what some companies are doing. They repurpose, they rebrand, and then they ask a much higher price for it.
My understanding of that is that this is equivalent to a new patent with 20-year protection, right? And monopoly.
Yeah, not... Yeah, is that a new patent? Good question. I'm just thinking of the LYDIE case where they really misused the whole thing. I know they didn't even submit a new patent. They just cut it off all the other suppliers, and they created some monopoly position, and they rebranded for an orphan indication, and they did the price times 500. And yeah, that's how they got market exclusivity. So there are ways for companies to misuse the drug repurposing, and for purely economic reasons. And that's something we also want to avoid by keeping it very open. And yes, for the generic companies, if a third party does all the work, then they kind of all benefit from it.
So that's why so I see, it sounds like an abuse of dominant position, that you monopolize the market. So this could be broken up by competition authorities. I also know that sometimes you just add some change. I mean, you modify slightly the compound and you get exactly, you repatent. These things could be, I mean, it's like the first part. Why do you authorize that? It would be so easy to just say, no, sorry, it's generic, it's over. We don't accept new patents. We don't accept new drugs on the market.
Yeah, but then it's the regulator who has to decide. Huh?
So why don't the regulators do that? That's exactly my question.
Yeah, we have to talk to Emer Cook, I assume, because the regulators, what strikes me, it's not within their remits to do that. Then the European Commission have to expand their authority. For them. What they only do, they look at safety and efficacy, and they don't care about, sorry to say it so black and white, but they really don't care about the price. They don't care about even the added therapeutic value in the end. For them, it's safety and efficacy, and that is within their limits. Nothing
so
more.
Value added. Your point, if I understand, is that they should have value added as an extra necessary condition to add to. Okay.
I already would be happy if that would become within the remits of the regulator, or that they work closely with the HTA. But of course, as I explained today, HTA is at member state level. Hopefully we'll get the European HTA now.
No, but that's a clear reform proposal.
Yeah.
Very intelligible.
I really think we need more European HTA, and then closer collaboration with the regulators to define what we are expecting from new products that enter the market.
Thank you so much. Very clear. Thanks.
And the next question is from another economist, Gani Aldashev. Gani?
Hello, thank you, LYDIE, for a very interesting talk. I learned a lot. I'm a development economist, so my background is somewhat different. And my question is, are we sure that non-profit firms or non-profit organizations would not also engage in Me Too kind of behavior? The reason I'm asking is that in my studies, in my experience, what I studied concerning international development, for example, international NGOs are often accused of clustering in some areas and not going into the others, or doing all the same kind of projects and not taking care of some other highly useful type of projects as well. So that kind of behavior of clustering and repeating each other seems to be present also in the non-profit world. So my question is, are there any good grounds to believe that in the pharma sector, the non-profits would diversify more and would not do that much Me Too as compared to the for-profits? Maybe because I'm not very familiar with the sector, so I don't know its dynamics from the non-profit perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think we really should avoid that. The non-profit organization, that's one of the reasons, for example, we are participating in the International Cancer Research Forum, where they really try to map internationally, worldwide, all the ongoing activities by non-profits in cancer research. And we would like Belgium to become, as a country, a member of that, just to be very transparent on where everybody is, what everybody is doing, and to do it in collaboration. I think, yeah, if we walk the talk and we want to serve the patient, it doesn't make sense to be competitive among non-profit organizations. And I'm not saying, I hope it's not happening today. We certainly try to avoid it. And for all our projects, we do complete horizon scanning to make sure that nobody else is doing it. And if so, we try to connect with them. But yes, there's work to do there, and I think the type of databases and things that are out there can be used to avoid exactly what you say, that we should start doing the same things with the non-profits. Yeah, that would be stupid.
So if I understand well, what you're saying is that in the non-profit sector, there would be less attempts to not to share information. Absolutely. And therefore there'll be more drive for transparency, which is an important reason why you might have less of a Me Too kind of behavior.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And I think we should be very alert for that and really avoid it. That's
and
clear.
instead the private sector would not have these incentives because they would like to they would not want to share information with each other and this kind of. Okay, I understand that. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lydie. Then Michelle had another question on the COVID-19 trials. Michelle?
Michelle, you're muted. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, again, I'm sorry if you addressed this at the beginning of your talk, but I would like to have your feelings about the way trials were conducted during the first wave. And actually, drug repurposing was really the main topic there.
Yeah.
We all know, what happened. And I don't know, if I considered what has been done, my analysis is that the UK performed very well. And actually, it's the UK trial which clearly demonstrated the lack of usefulness of hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
For the rest, and I had some, discussion with investigators in Belgium, I don't think it was very well organized. And I know that several investigators were frustrated not to be able to really contribute and to include patients in large trials, including the Solidarity trial and the Discovery trial. I think that this, to some extent, improved, but when I looked at what happened, many trials, small trials, we don't receive all the conclusions. Transparency was not really excellent. I think that, if I may say, many opportunities were lost with, too many patients involved in too many small trials without conclusion to be reached at the end. And yeah, I was just willing to get your opinion on this and to see how we could do better. And as you know, the KCE launched these 2 trials on plasma therapies. So I'm not sure that the choice of plasma therapy was the best choice, but at least it was done, and I think that it works quite nicely with a good collaboration between the universities. And I was just wondering whether organizations like yours could play a role in fostering this type of trials, making sure that Belgium is fully engaged in the best collaborative trials, especially in Europe.
Thank you, Michelle, for that question. Yes, I couldn't agree more. I really think there has been a lot of opportunities lost because of all the small and sometimes really badly designed trials. But that's the problem that we have still today. There's not enough Europe. Health is still at the member state level, and member states want to do their thing. If we would have had a European driver that was ready there to set up immediately and on short notice the right trials, with indeed the example of the UK, but we don't have the infrastructure today, we don't have the statisticians, we don't have the whole thing out there. I think it would have been really an improvement. And indeed, at the Belgian level, to set up the trials, we have been contacted by the KCE, and so our medical director, Gauthier, gave some input. But of course, yeah, we keep our focus on cancer. And we think it really, what should happen is that at the European level, we should start thinking and setting up the infrastructure, and Belgium should collaborate, and we are happy to help out there. But of course, we are a small collaboration. We have experience in the whole idea about that type of trial designs, but we just have to work on it together, I think. But I really believe it should be more European, and that's for me the lesson learned from COVID, that each country doing its own small lousy trial, sorry to say that doesn't help anything.
Yeah, my comment was really, or my idea is more about the role of philanthropy, especially venture philanthropy. I think that you are one of the important examples of this in Belgium. And I very often mention the fact, look what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing. So I think that the role of philanthropy is more than providing more money, is a role to make sure that research is organized in the best way. And it's there that I think you could play an important role.
Yeah, that's what we're trying. And that's why we now also for the cell therapy and the whole, for me, it's really a big issue there hanging, that we have now put, we took the initiative to talk with La Fondation and Kom op tegen kanker, just to make sure that all the philanthropic money today going into autologous cell therapy, that we should think further and that we really work together with the foundations to see where we can make meaningful contributions. Just supporting research for the research doesn't make sense. We have to look at the patient at the end.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lydie. And as we come to the end of this seminar, I'd like to thank you with the words of Roland Pochet, who is the president of the Belgian Brain Council, saying, thank you, Lydie, for this innovative approach in which a true patient centricity concept is applied. That's absolutely true. Thank you. I hope you keep on pushing ahead with the idea of indeed broadening Europe's remits, also very much towards measuring the real added value of innovation, and keeping up this positive spirit. And thank you so much. Just for our audience, the slides and recordings will be available and spread to all of you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.